At least you can hear me now. Okay, so I hope you'll have a pleasant Monday so far, and I would like you to now officially welcome you to our second seminar of our RCH online seminar series. And for those who weren't with us last time, let me just briefly introduce this seminar and also myself. So my name is Sara Vukotic, and on behalf of the Research Center for Humanities, I'm happy to welcome you to the second installment of our online seminar series, which are titled Transdisciplinary Research on Cultures and Identities in East Central Europe. In the previous session, as you all probably remember, we had the pleasure of hosting Tijana Koprivica, who explored the intermediality of Yugoslav avant-garde poetry books, examining more closely the relationship between text and visual in the context of addressing the question, what it is a book. So Tijana, if you are here with us today, I think you are. Thank you very much once again for your presentation. And I would just wanted to point out that that presentation is now available also on our Research Center for Humanities webpage. I will insert the link in the chat after. And of course, Tijana, welcome to Nova Gorica now that you are here with us in person. So today we have the pleasure of hosting Mirna Sokolovic, who will present his doctoral project on the construction of Europe by the Yugoslav literary right. Mirna Sokolovic is a PhD student at the Institute of Slavic Studies at the University of Graz, and he specializes in the relations between the Yugoslav avant-garde and the right-wing concepts of Europe. In this session, he will discuss how in the avant-garde art was conceived in an international framework, only for this focus to gradually narrow over time and move toward the concept of Europe as writers became increasingly engaged in right-wing and collaborationist circles. So as for the structure of this seminar, it will be the same as the previous one. So our speaker will have around 20 minutes for the presentation, and then the discussion will follow. So again, 20 minutes, and this will be, once again, the opportunity for us to engage critically, to pose some questions, give feedback, and just speak our opinions of the presentation. So with that, I'm pleased to now give the word to Mirnes. He already shared the presentation, so now we can all listen to him. Thank you.
Thank you, Sara, for this introduction. I hope you can hear me well. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Thank you for inviting me at
amazing.
your seminar. I will present you a segment of my research today, which is instructive and I believe provides a comprehensive view. I hope to fit in within 20 minutes. I would like to take you on a journey through a paradox that shaped European literary and cultural history in the early 20th century, how avant-garde modernists known for their radical poetics and experimental extremism found themselves aligned with the reactionary politics and in some cases outright fascism. From the very beginning, modernist writers looked for provocation. They dismantled traditional forms, rejected bourgeois aesthetics, and embraced radical language. However, by early 30s, some of these artists, initially scorned by conservative critics, began to appear in the right-wing literary circles. They were not just contributors, but active participants, writing for and even founding publications that openly sympathized with the rising fascist movements across Europe. This ideological shift was not only opportunistic, it was rooted in a deeper intellectual transformation. While some avant-gardists aligned with leftist politics and remained loyal to artistic experimentations, others found the attractive compatibility between the original revolutionary stance and the nationalist and social nationalist and definitely anti-modernist rhetoric of the far right. They saw themselves not as betrayers of the avant-garde ideals, but as their true believers, channeling provocation into reactionary modernism, a term coined by theorist Jeffrey Herf. This was the fulfillment of their old avant-garde dream to move from words to actions, to transform life, some kind of the new right-wing жизнестроение. Reactionary modernists believed that technological advancement and modernity could be reconciled with an ideology of authenticity, one that privileged instinct over intellect, blood over reason, and national destiny over abstract analysis. This convergence between avant-garde radicalism and nationalist rhetoric allowed conservative critics and former artistic revolutionaries to find common ground in their visions of the cultural and political rebirth. Now, let's bring this phenomenon closer to Yugoslav context. During the 30s and the 40s, certain Yugoslav writers played a significant role in the pro-war propaganda, anti-Semitic propaganda, often through literary magazines such as Ideje, Srpski narod, Hrvatska revija, Hrvatska misao, Novo vrijeme, and Color. What is striking is that most of these contributors to these publications were avant-gardists Miloš Crnjanski, Ivo Andrić, Boško Tokin, Dragan Aleksić, Ljubomir Micić, Todor Manojlović, or Svetoslav Stefanović. Their rhetoric did not merely adopt crude nationalism. It invoked symbols of so-called Europeans high culture. They presented European as a spiritually unified entity threatened by external forces, mechanized barbarism from the East, Americanism and robotism from the West, and so-called Judeo-Masonic conspiracy from everywhere. According to them, unless a cultural and national revival took place, Europe would cease to produce minds like Pascal, Goethe, Dante, or Niegos. They argued that the nation had a central role in restoring a lost European cultural order. This new mission positioned national identity as a stabilizing force, both within a broader European project and as means of internal cultural purification. Within this vision, Jews were cast as an existential threat. They were depicted as ruthless, as eternal outsiders who could never understand the sacred connection between homeland and history, between soil and sacrifice in Europe. Their exclusion from the national culture was framed not as an act of destruction, but as defense of civilization itself. The language of humanism, European heritage, and cultural refinement became a tool to justify exclusion and later extermination. This nationalist propaganda, however, faced a resistance in polemics even in 30s, not only from the leftist intellectuals, but from Jewish and avant-garde writers who refused to be assimilated into this ideological machinery. Their work stood as acts of disarticulation, dismantling the nationalist grand narrative and resisting the transformation of literature into propaganda. In this presentation today, I will introduce you the cases of 4 avant-garde Yugoslav writers who drifted toward right-wing and fascist concepts closer to the Belgrade scene, as well as an anthology that within the literary scene of the independent state of the Croatia and Croatian literature, utilized avant-garde concepts and poets attempting to promote an important stylistic syncretism in the new cultural order. Before presenting you these cases, I will also give you the only 2 examples of the theoretical background that are important for me for this research. At the same time, it will shed light on the interpretation of the following cases. First one is the book of the Jeffrey Herf, The Reactionary Modernism. In this book, Jeffrey Herf analyzes how the Nazis tried to separate technology from the rationality of the Enlightenment. He explains that while technological progress in the Western world was traditionally connected to rationalism and liberalism, the Nazis rejected this association and wanted to demonstrate that technology could serve German nationalism without aligning it with the Enlightenment ideals. Herf then explores how within Nazi ideology, Jews were seen as the embodiment of the Enlightenment and capitalism, of abstraction or rationalization. The Nazis believed that eliminating the Jews was a way to rid Europe of the soulless rationality of capitalism, thereby achieving their cultural revolution. Modern anti-Semitism in this context translated this cultural opposition to capitalism into racial and biological terms. If Jews were seen as the physical manifestation, their elimination was framed as synonymous with the victory of cultural revolution that would restore emotion and immediacy to world threatened by soulless thought. The Holocaust, in that sense, became one of the outcomes of this cultural revolution. The second book is written by Benjamin G. Martin, entitled Nazi-Fascist New Order of European Culture. Instead of the international style, multitude of languages, literature as a republic of letters that exists across national borders, Nazis opted for transnational cultural exchange according to these new intercultural principles, founded, quote, on the spine of the renewed Europe, the ray of light toward its spiritual reinvigoration and the bulwark of the defense of its culture. The first thing which is important to me is the sentence which says that starting in the mid-30s, Nazi leaders worked to create a rival network of the cultural institutions across Europe aimed at reorganizing European cultural life. This network brought together filmmakers, writers, composers, and the intellectuals under Germany's European empire, particularly during the war. The second point is that the Nazis argued that the cultural chaos in Europe since World War I, marked by modernist movements and the rise of popular culture like Hollywood and jazz, needed to be replaced by organized hierarchical cultural structure. Unlike humanist views of Europe as a spiritual heritage, the Nazis promote a concrete spatial concept of Europe, tied to specific peoples and their cultures as part of Hitler's vision of Europe of race and space. The Axis powers saw themselves as the backbone of renewed Europe, offering a solution to the European question by harmonizing different racial and national elements, rejecting confusions and promoting unity. The combination of great importance was the heritage mixture of Germans and the Romans as two racial and national elements in whose tension, quote, thanks to genius of the Duce and Führer, the balance between the two poles of the axis will be later established in Europe. And the fifth point is the quote of Joseph Goebbels, who presented himself as a European, not a German, to the European film industry, emphasizing the importance of this transnational cultural cooperation within Nazi propaganda. Now I will present the cases of the drifting Yugoslav avant-gardists, as well as quote of the previous avant-garde text, which, when read a posteriori, will reveal the core from which later right-wing ideologies could have developed. The first one is the Manifesto of Zenitism by Ljubomir Micic from 1921. In the Manifesto of Zenitism, Ljubomir Micic
Hey, Mirnes, I'm so sorry. Just a question. Do you see the presentation moving? Do you all see it?
No, we don't.
Okay, maybe you just because
can
we still see.
Can you see now?
Yes,
Yeah.
now.
Okay, now we see
Okay,
it.
sorry.
Yeah. Sorry.
We are now at this point. I hope you can see now.
Yeah, now it's good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
great.
Thank you.
Ljubomir Micic creates a poetic hyperreality calling for the destruction of the suburbs of the large plague-ridden Western European cities. At the same time, he ironically warns Western, Central, and Northern Europe to close their gates because, as he puts it, the barbarians are coming, specifically the children of the barbarian genius from the southeast. Of course, at this stage, it was all just words, the manifesto, a poetic provocation rather than a real call to action. But by 1923, in his text Parrot and Monopoly, Croatian Culture, Micic in Zenit moves from poetic terminology to political categories. Here he adopts the persona of Serb criticizing Croatian culture, describing it as a legitimate child of unnatural marriage between a quote, a trained monkey and a parrot. He even gives it a mock aristocratic title, Her Exalted Grace, Madame Varnish imitation of culture in Zagreb. He ridicules Croatian cultural symbols as nothing more than a cheap local knockoffs, mocking everything from a domestic necktie production to so-called homosexual pajamas sold in English boutiques. In this pamphlet, this avant-garde fury, originally directed at bourgeois concepts in avant-garde, zeroes in on Croatian culture, which he reduced to nothing more than bourgeois manners within the Yugoslav context. He abandons aesthetic debate entirely, replacing it with overtly national and political connotations. Micic doesn't stop there. He proclaims his mission to balkanize Europe in chaotic hopa-tsupa fashion, offering it gusle, plum jam, and marmalade. But as Radomir Konstantinovich points out, Micic's attitude differs from Dadaism, where self-negation dismantles everything. His anti-Europe was never anti-self, unlike Rasko Petrovich. For example, Micic's barbarism wasn't about losing oneself, nor was it about dissolving into humorous absurdity, as we see it Dragan Alexić, that is figure of the naked man. But by 1940, his avant-garde rhetoric had transformed it into a manifesto of the Serbianism. Here, Micic lays out a political program declaring Serbianism as the healthiest foundation for moral, social education, and general order. More than that, he envisions it as an internal, quote, internal Serbian flame, burning in the hearts of all Serbs with a singular fire. His hope is that Serbianism's spiritual reach in Yugoslavia will always exceed Serbia's political power. This was not just poetic rhetoric anymore. It was emphatic ideological statement at time of crisis. Unlike the earlier provocateur Micic, as we see Micic, here we see Micic the ideologue, offering a concrete solution of the crisis, striving to turn words into reality. His programs, in some ways, aligned with the ideological and cultural climate of Nedić's collaboration in Serbia. However, he remained outside both the state apparatus and mainstream cultural life during the war, ultimately an outsider. The second example is Svetoslav Stefanović. Challenging Western culture and the legacy of Rome and Christianity, the avant-garde thinker in the 1919 assigns a special role to the Slavs. He further argues that the Slavs' second great mission is to dismantle, quote, the cursed legacy of Rome, the system that plunging and enslaving smaller and weaker peoples whose last terrible act is today outrageously bloody war. Stefanović contrasts bourgeois Europe with an alternative Europe, yet to be born in the spirit of revolutionary transformation. For us Slavs, quote, the sense of goodness and the beauty is something deeply spontaneous, rooted in nature itself, in blood, in race. Although his avant-garde text is still framed as a manifesto, it already hints at Stefanović's tendency to transpose political categories into biological ones and cultural categories into national and racial terms. Just 4 years later, in Miso, Stefanović would advocate for similar stylistic syncretism that transcend European art. You can see here this quote, which says a lot about us, about the concept of the Europe in the Yugoslav avant-garde art at the beginning of 20s. And in the next slide, you can see that he drifted toward right-wing concepts at the beginning of the 30s. This is This is the quote from Miso at the beginning. In Miso, Stefanovic criticized rigid aesthetic norms, rejecting the notion that primitivism equates to barbarism and destruction. It was the dispute with the Belgrade professors. He argued that primitivism is a vital force that enables art, citing foundational works such as the Aeneid and the Legend of the Holy Grail. Primitivism revitalizes art, the quote, much like the infusion of primitive blood rejuvenates degenerate races. This inclination toward organic and medical metaphors would, within a few years, evolve into a more explicit racial discourse. In magazine Idea in the 1934 and 35, Stefanovic had transitioned from a metaphorical manifesto language to overt racial ideology. He explored, quote, the role of blood groups in racial differentiation, asserting that they were key to distinguishing Europeans from Asians. Citing Paracelsus, he declared blood is a very special juice, arguing that blood groups represent primordial racial characteristics, possibly predating other anthropological traits. The magazine Idea was the first Yugoslav avant-garde publication to openly and programmatically express sympathy for right-wing movements and fascism in the 1934 and 1935. It also launched a literary struggle against so-called Marxist literature. Contributors included notable avant-garde writers such as Miloš Crnjanski, Svetislav Stefanovic, Dragan Aleksić, Ivo Andrić, and Stanislav Vinover, as well as Dragiša Vasić. What had happened in 1919, a niche and artistic vision with only a loose connection to contemporary politics now in Idea became Stefanovic's treatment on the political fate of Europe. The old avant-garde Yugoslav visions of the dynamic man enabling decadent Europe, ideas developed by Ivan Meštrović and the Zenitists, now took on the form of a political program, a res, a thing, a truth. Stefanovic assigned this dynamic figure a special role in European context, reducing Pan-Slavism to specific racial type. He envisions the dynamic man as the embodiment of humanitas heroica. Stefanovic also in his text commentary on the burning of books in Idea on the March 30, 1935, openly supported the burning of books in Germany, portraying it as a necessary fight, quote, against immorality. He specifically targeted work by sexologists and proponents of that is also quote of the Oedipus complex, figures like Freud, Magnus Hirschfeld, Klaus Mann, and Tucholsky, arguing that their writings were corrupting and the moral fabric of society. He called for that he described as the fire of the revolution, a force that would cleanse the spiritual atmosphere of what he saw as, quote, a moral filth and stench, particularly in literature and scientific thought dealing with sexuality. He framed this purge as defense against, quote, freedom, false modernism, and the falsified social aspirations. This perspective not only reveals Stefanovic's alignment with fascist cultural policies, but also underscores how he frames censorship and repression as a necessary cultural purification. The third example is Boško Tokin, who presents at the beginning of the 20s Yugoslav not as just a nationalism, but as humanistic and progressive force embodied by new dynamic generation that contribute to Europe's renewal. But the admiration of Yugoslavism later evolved into sympathy for national culture over international art. In that regard, he emphasized the advantages of sound film. In the nationalist magazine 20. Vek, which was edited by Milan Stojadinovic in 1938, Boško Tokin published the text which is titled Development of Yugoslav Cinema, Ostvarenje domaćeg filma. The advent of sound film, according to Boško Tokin, led to change in the generation within the film industry and created opportunities for the establishment of national teams. Silent film had a universal appeal, but sound film emphasized national identity through language and music. Sound film enhanced cinema's ability to shape public opinion and convey ideological messages. That was just introduction to Boško Tokin's engagement in the magazine Kola, which was openly collaborationist magazine 14. During the occupation in Belgrade, Boško Tokin was a contributor to the magazine Kola, a monthly illustrated publication issued in Belgrade between 1942 and 1944, he published political and propaganda articles glorifying the occupier, along with the various short news pieces and contributions on religion, literature, film, theater, and culture. The fourth example is Todor Manojlović. He had written maybe the first study on avant-garde poetics and avant-garde European poets. It was a reflection of new European spirit, which is also quote, he saw futurism and as an expression of the Italian soul shaped by its land and history. But more than that, it represented a new generation, one born out of the chaos of modern times, where a miraculous harmony of feelings united those he called newborn good Europeans. But in 1942, his essay, The Mystical Spring of the City Obradović, published in collaborationist magazine Prosvetni Glasnik, Manojlović framed the great Serbian Enlightenment writer as a bridge between Serbia and Europe. Now the role of Europe has completely changed. One no longer participates in it as a poet, but as a Serb or a Serbian artist. Here is very important, this quote. Manojlović's quote, in the name of the national concept of collaboration with Serbia, he said, the vibrant spirit of Europe that once united the avant-garde now takes on the role of connecting the legitimate national space to the European cultural space. The right-wing and avant-garde concept is linked by the category of the European spirit. Also, his colleague, one of the main collaborations, writer Svetoslav Stefanović, presented a striking historical parallel. In his text Record of the Chronicle on Vidovdan, 1941, he compared the war unfolding in Europe to legendary battle of 1389, when Christianized Eastern and Western Europe had fought together against the advancing Ottoman forces. In this worldview, Serbia had a clear duty to stand shoulder to shoulder with those fighting for this supposed renewed European civilization. When Manojlović and Stefanović started writing for collaborationist magazines like Srpski Narod, Prosvetni Glasnik, and Novo Vreme, they didn't completely abound modernism. Their nationalism took on a more contemporary tone. They saw their return to tradition as something fresh and relevant, a break from the outdated perspectives of older professors and critics. That was the continuation of their polemics with traditional professors and critics. And despite their alignment with the regime, they remained entangled in an uneasy relationship with Enlightenment ideals. By the early 40s, the war became institutionally tied to the Ministry of Education, led by publicists and writers such as Velibor Jonić and Vladimir Velmar Janković. As Olivera Milosavljević points out, the ministry pushed the National Socialist ideology further than any other. Through its newspaper Prosvetni Glasnik, the ministry actively promoted Hitler's education system, embracing its racial policies and ideological frameworks.
Yes, I'm so sorry. We have maybe 5 more minutes tops, so if
Okay.
you can go, so we have time for discussion.
Okay, I will mention Luigi Salvini's the cross-cultural European syncretism in Croatian literature. At the same time, Luigi Salvini's as a role in Croatian literature, particularly through his anthology Poeti Croati Moderni, published in Milan in 1942, was significant in fostering connections between Croatian and European literary traditions. In this work, Salvini included avant-garde Croatian poets, which was an important move in recognizing the country's literary contribution to the broader European landscape. He included 5 poems by even Miroslav Krleža and provided detailed commentary. But Salvini's analysis of Croatian literature was deeply connected to the European concept of the cultural syncretism shaped by Latin influences on the continent. He highlighted the Dubrovnik poets, noting their exposure to Italian writers and their fluency in Latin and Italian languages that enabled the artistic expression. In addition, Salvini's work contributed to the discourse on the Germanic Latin origins of Croatian culture, particularly through the magazine Hrvatska Revija. The publications provided a platform for discussing the intersection of race and space, particularly in relation to the Germanic and the Roman elements that were central to the ideological framework of Hitler's Europe. Now, I will pass to the conclusion of this presentation. If we want to challenge wartime propaganda and the idea of so-called new cultural European order for Europe to make counterbalance, we need to rethink Europe as a process, one shaped by dislocation, fragmentation, and loss. The inability to bear witness to the unspoken and the unrepresentable. These were crucial in understanding the Holocaust and in shaping a language distinct from war propaganda in 40s. When we speak today of Europe's spiritual identity, we often overlook an entire phase in European literature, the moment when language itself had to be dismantled and rebuilt. The people had to be reimagined beyond grand myths, sacrificial narratives, and the process is far from over. National difference faded in comparison to a deeper question: how does language shape visions of the future in tensions between chaos and form? Today, thinking about Europe is only possible through the experience of linguistic destruction. This means writing and thinking from a state of rootlessness, free from myths of eternal identity and grand ideals. To be a writer in exile means exactly this: to remain far from the noise of the masses and even further from the demands of nation state and its cultural institutions. Literature demonstrated that barbarism and high culture progress hand in hand. By tracing the connections between great stylist and extremist engagement, it raises the question of whether one can avoid error by assuming these are always separate matters. European art, in its tendency to glorify the individual and elevate the figure of the great author, simultaneously erects a monument that is also a sublimation of violence. Thus, the destruction of monuments should not always be avoided. The need of avant-garde contestation of the categories of work, author, and the great European art has never ceased. We just have entered a new phase of re-evaluation. Paraphrasing George Stein in The House of Classical Humanism, the dream of reason that once animated Yugoslav society and its avant-garde has largely collapsed. The belief in cultural progress and inherent rationality from ancient Greece to Marxist utopianism in socialist Yugoslavia can no longer be taken for granted. Technological man remains vulnerable. to political hatred and the lure of destruction. We now know that someone can read Krleža, the surrealist, or Zenitist at night, play Bach or Schubert, and still go to work in Jasenovac or Staro Sajmište the next morning, or write for collaborationist journals. It is not just the institutions of culture, universities, literature, the arts fail to resist political barbarism. In many cases, they actively embrace it, giving it legitimacy and ritual. Why? What is the link between high literacy and the temptation of the inhuman? Does a deep abstract boredom with the literate civilization prepare the ground for barbarism? These questions remain especially relevant in post-Yugoslav context. George Steiner's words from the early 60s still resonate today. Because the community of traditional values is splintered, because words themselves have been twisted and cheapened, because the classic forms of statement and metaphor are yielding to complex traditional modes, the art of reading, of true literacy, must be reconstituted. It is the task of a literary criticism to help us read as total human beings by example of precision, fear, and delight. Compared to the act, that task is secondary, but it is never counted more. Without it, without questioning, creation itself may fall into silence. Thank you for your intentions. I look forward to your feedback.
Thank you very much, Mirnes, for this very detailed and interesting presentation, I would say. And now I would like to open the floor for discussion. We have maybe 15 minutes if you all agree. We'll see how it goes. So if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to speak or raise your hand or write a comment, whatever you feel comfortable with. Yes,
I can
Tina?
start. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mirnes, for this very packed presentation. I think it would be also very good to maybe read it to kind of get more of what you were explaining. I'm interested how you will structure your thesis. Is it going to be kind of more work-centered or author-centered? Like now you structured it like through writers, but I'm kind of, it's interesting how you will make this how you will contextualize the 20s and 30s, and if the best way is to do it through artists or through concepts and works. So this is kind of how what I'm thinking. So that's one question that I had in mind. Not long ago, we had this a symposium on, it was called Distant Gaze. It was organized by Galeria Božidar Jakac. And it's also maybe, it was a good way to get into this different ways of, conceptualizing same artists through ideologies of fascism and the differences between 20s and 30s. In Slovenia, we have also artists or writers that used Micic's term, Barbarogenius. Kosovel mentions it many times. Also, of course, August Černigo in his letters, and also Kosovel, not just in letters, but in his poems and his notices. And it's also interesting to maybe kind of think about how this plays in different context in Slovenia, also because of the closeness of fascism in Italy. So the Goriška region, the Trieste and Gorizia, where our university also is. So I think this is maybe one where I can see how it would be interesting to track the concepts and how they played out, and not also it's interesting that August Černigo was a visual artist, so we don't have his written kind of works in 30s to kind of see this maybe transformation as you see it of some particular Serbian and Croatian artists that you explained or described. And Kosovel died very early. So it's also, yeah, it's a question what he would say for his also fellow writers and artists later in 30s. So that's maybe one comment to explore the Slovenian context. There's also quite a lot of scholarship today conceptualizing this barbarian genius as a basic other in the context of Orientalism. So maybe that's also something to have in mind when kind of, talking about this. So this is what I kind of have in mind, like but what I'm interested is the materials, how you will again structure that, and also the reasons, if you have already now reasons why this transformation happened, or how do you, is it just for, what are different reasons that you already now can kind of point out for this radical right ideology?
Yeah, thank you for proposing these really key questions for writing my thesis. My first idea was that I will structure it as the analysis of the different cases, but I think that the better idea is now to structure it as analysis of different concepts, of different ideas. And the main thing is these transformations from the avant-garde concepts toward right-wing concepts, but at the same time finding these concepts which would say a lot of about the concepts which is like introductions into right-wing poetics in the middle of the avant-garde poetics. But my main reason was the continuation of the treatment of these cases, of these writers in the recent post-Yugoslav literary history. You know, they see these biographies of these authors and this concept as a blind spots in the recent literary history. And at the same time, in the French literary history, in the German, and even in Spanish, and definitely in Italian literary history, you can see that these things, this relationship between avant-garde concepts and the right-wing concepts is now definitely evaluated and analyzed. So now in post-Yugoslav context, we have to do this job. So that was the main things, but it will definitely be the I will analyze these concepts rather than cases of the authors.
Thank you very much, Christina, for your question, and Mirnes for your answer. Do we maybe have any more questions, comments, suggestions? Okay. Then I could say thank you very much, Mirnes, for being with us today. Also, thank you to all of you others who've been with us today. And I apologize for the inconvenience at the beginning. I discovered that my laptop has a camera button that I wasn't aware of. So now I am. And yeah, see you next time in 2 weeks. Thank you, Mirnes.
Thank you, Sarah.